Like what you see here? Then be sure to subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8, a channel devoted to the history of college football. New videos drop twice a week. Click the card in the upper right corner or the link in the description to subscribe now. And now, on with our feature presentation. October 25th, 2005. We're at Minute Maid Park for Game 3 of the 2005 World Series between the Houston Astros and the Chicago White Sox. This game, which the White Sox won in 14 innings by a final score of 7-5, is notable and still lives on in the history of the sport nearly 2 decades later for a few reasons. Number one, up until Game 3 of the 2018 World Series between the Boston Red Sox and Los Angeles Dodgers, this was the longest World Series game of all time, taking 5 hours and 41 minutes to complete, or 341 minutes if you're doing the math at home, meaning that the game ended on Wednesday morning at 2:20 a.m. on the East Coast. It wasn't just the longest World Series game by duration at the time, but it was tied for the longest number of innings ever, as not since Game 2 of the 1916 World Series between the Boston Red Sox and the Brooklyn Robins have we seen a game go this long, where a team needed to record 42 outs to get the win. But number two, this game was notable because it was the first time ever that a World Series game was played in Houston. As hard as that might seem to believe, it took more than 40 years for Houston to get a World Series game of some kind, as even though the Astros, or Colt 45s as they were originally known, joined the National League in 1962, it took more than 40 years before a game on baseball's biggest stage was held in that city. But what you might not realize is that a World Series game was almost played there years before then. Sorta. I'm not talking about the Astros coming awfully close to the pennant, but losing in the LCS or something along those lines. I mean an actual World Series game being played in the city of Houston. At least, that's what many people thought, before it was revealed to be completely fake, and a practical joke gone horribly wrong, leaving a ton of people across the city, and across the country for that matter, rightfully angry and confused. Because while you might know a ton about the 1989 World Series, you might not know the crazy story behind this, where one radio station tried to use a natural disaster and a tragedy to their advantage, and it backfired in rather spectacular fashion. Because this is the story behind the forgotten drama and the stupidest controversy of the 1989 World Series. Before I talk about the drama in question, and how Houston of all cities got involved in this mess, we need some context to understand what was happening in the series at the time. I'm not going to dive too much into this, since this part is incredibly well documented, and there are tons of videos, articles, and documentaries on this. But on October 17, 1989, the Oakland Athletics were set to take on the San Francisco Giants in Game 3 of the World Series at Candlestick Park, with the A's holding on to a 2-0 series lead. It was a beautiful, picture-perfect evening for a baseball game. When ABC signed on at 5 o'clock Pacific time, you wouldn't think anything of it. And then, out of nowhere, as Tim McCarver was presenting a highlight package from previous games in the series, this happened.
Allowing Jose Canseco to score, and he fails to get Dave Parker at second base, so the Oakland A's take.
I'll tell you what, we're having
An earthquake hit. At 5:04 p.m., an earthquake hit Santa Cruz County, killing 63 people, injuring another 3,800, and causing a section of a double-deck bridge in Oakland to collapse. In total, the damages for the 6.9 earthquake, according to the Richter scale, were estimated at $6 billion, and it even caused some minor structural damage to Candlestick Park, as while it was nothing serious, it did force crews in the aftermath to come and assess the damage, even moving a San Francisco 49ers game that was supposed to be played there on October 22nd against the New England Patriots to Stanford Stadium down in Palo Alto, about 35 miles south. Obviously, the game was postponed to a future date. You couldn't possibly play Game 3 of the World Series right after an earthquake destroyed the city. It just wasn't safe, it just wasn't practical, and it just wasn't the right thing to do. At this point, baseball took a back seat to the San Francisco Bay Area being devastated, and it left MLB officials in a serious dilemma. On one hand, You need to play the World Series. You need to finish the season. You can't just call the season right then and there, or declare the A's as the winners after 2 games. And you can't delay the season a ton and delay it until San Francisco is fully healed, because then it'll be too cold. The TV networks would be up in arms, your sponsors would be up in arms, and it would interfere with just about everyone's plans. On the other hand, you might not be able to complete the World Series in San Francisco. Aside from not knowing the structural damage to the stadium, putting on a ballgame takes a ton of work and requires a lot of public resources. You need to divert a ton in order to get a game of this magnitude going, especially from a security standpoint, a medical staff standpoint, a police standpoint, a traffic delegation standpoint, and just about everything else under the sun that you can think of. Can you really play a baseball game and devote these resources to that when your city just collapsed? And when people are hurt? I'm not sure you can. Which means even though you have to finish the World Series, finishing it in San Francisco might not be the best option in the world, nor might it even be practical or possible. You've got to look elsewhere, and potentially have to look at neutral sites so that the game can go on and you can fulfill your business interests, while at the same time, you're not taking resources away from the city, and you're not playing a game in the middle of a tragedy. With that, there were quite a few options being considered, and one of the most notable ones, and perhaps the odds-on favorite if this was going to happen, was the Astrodome down in Houston. It made sense as to why they were looking at the Astrodome. On Sunday, October 22nd, the Houston Oilers were set to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then, not until a Rolling Stones concert on November 8th was anything set to take place there. For 2 whole weeks, the Astrodome was vacant, and could have easily hosted all 5 remaining games of the World Series if necessary. Plus, it's not across the country, it's away from California, so critical resources wouldn't have to be used, and it's in a dome, so you never have to worry about the weather, which is a godsend for the TV networks in particular, seeing as the last thing they wanted was to shuffle around their entire schedule because of this delay, only for another game to get delayed due to inclement weather. As Ethan Cartwright, the marketing director for the Houston Sports Association, said on the Astrodome possibly hosting the World Series, "We'd love to have it. Houston is about as neutral as you can get. We'd be tickled to have the World Series. We stand ready to serve. It would let baseball fans have a shot at going to a baseball game that they've never had a chance to. Plus, when you factor in the economic impact that this would bring to Houston, which Cartwright estimated would be in the tens of millions of dollars, even though it was at the last minute, there was no downside whatsoever, in the eyes of Houston officials, to moving the World Series over there. Now that part was 100% real. Houston expressed legitimate interest in having the World Series there, and while everything was still up in the air, it was at least on the radar of Houston fans that maybe, just maybe, the World Series would be played there if the stars aligned the right way. But there was one radio station that took this news that Cartwright expressed interest in having the Astrodome host the series and decided, hey, wouldn't it be funny if we made a joke about this? Wouldn't it be funny if we pranked all our listeners, mocked the victims of the earthquake and the natural disaster in the process, and announced that this was actually happening? Suppose you're a family planning a vacation with your kids, and you float Disney World around as an option. Then you say, wake up kids, we're going to the airport right now. We're going to go to Disney World. And then you get to the airport and you turn the car around and say, we fooled you. We're not going to Disney World. There's no vacation. How hysterical would that be? Joke of the year right there that definitely wouldn't cause your kids to hate you forever and have trust issues and not believe a single word you would say from now on. That can't possibly backfire on you. And yet, KKBQ, a radio station in Houston, decided that somehow this would be a good idea because John Lander, a morning radio host for the station, decided to play a joke on his listeners. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but 5 times between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. On Thursday, October 20th, he announced that the Astrodome was not only hosting the World Series, but that 20,000 tickets were going to be made available. And again, this was believable enough that it wasn't obvious that Lander was kidding. It's not like me saying that the NFL is going to build a football stadium on the moon and play Super Bowl 80 there. So call today and reserve your tickets. In light of the tragedy, and in light of the statements put out by Cartwright, a lot of people, and rightfully and understandably so, thought that this was real. With that, the Astros phone lines got blown up, since it was assumed that the tickets would go through the Astros, as did the lines of local media outlets, with people asking about how this was going to work. What was supposed to be just a quiet day at the Astros office turned into absolute chaos, with angry fans calling and wondering why they couldn't get tickets, and then getting angry once they realized that it was fake. And then there were some fans, including over 30 cars worth, who lined up at the Astrodome outside the ticket office to get tickets that way. Maybe some fans were on their way to work, and then heard the news on their morning drive and made a detour or called off just so that they'd be guaranteed a ticket. But as you know, none of this ever happened. The 1989 World Series was not moved to Houston. Everything about this announcement was completely fake. And to say that people were outraged about this would be an understatement. Astros general manager Bill Wood was fuming, saying, "From our standpoint, having been out there, it appears to be sick humor. I doubt we'd appreciate sick humor about a hurricane in Houston from a San Francisco station. It doesn't add up to something smart." And the crazy part about all this? KKBQ didn't care at all. Despite listeners being outraged, despite the Astros being outraged, and despite the credibility of the station taking a complete nosedive, nothing happened. Station General Manager Al Law issued an apology, saying, "We blew it. It was a joke that turned out not to be a joke. We sometimes assume because of the nature of our morning show that listeners know we are kidding about everything we do." Essentially, blaming the people for falling for this. Brilliant strategy. John Lander issued a half-hearted apology, and Law took no disciplinary action against Lander whatsoever, saying, "We sat down and talked about what went wrong and vowed to do better. Nobody walked into this thing intending to hurt anybody. Lander's intentions were honorable. I wish it hadn't happened." I'm sorry, what? What part about Lander's intentions were honorable? Seriously, I'd love for Law to explain what specifically about Lander saying, "Great news! Because an earthquake hit San Francisco and killed a ton of people, the World Series is being moved to Houston. So drive down to the Astrodome right now and flood the phone lines to get your tickets now," is honorable. Honorable intentions that I wish it hadn't happened are reserved for something like a Good Samaritan trying to issue CPR to a choking victim. But it doesn't work. It's not reserved for this nonsense. There was nothing honorable about this. It was a horrible joke that was not just insensitive, but was disguised as actual news, had real-world implications, and hurt a ton of people, while at the same time, seemingly making fun of the whole earthquake situation. Great job all around. I'm not saying that this was the only thing that plagued the station, but in the fall of 1988, KKBQ was the second most popular station in Houston. In 1990, they dropped all the way down to 9th, and dropped to 13th in 1991. Lander didn't get his contract renewed, and the station had to rebrand to a country music radio station to try and get its ratings back. Again, was this ill-fated joke the reason that it plummeted so far? On its own, probably not. But it definitely didn't help matters, that's all I'm saying. Then again, it might have a bit to do with the competition that aired in 1990, where a student, in order to win $10,000, covered his body in honey and chicken feathers, then jumped into a pool of pig poop, and while in the pool of pig poop, bobbed for apples and carrots. No, I am not making that up. Either way, the station was never the same after this World Series controversy, because in 1989, by saying that the World Series had been moved to the Astrodome, KKBQ made an astronomical lapse in judgment. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com And be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.